The Utah frontier in 1871 didn't just test a person, it judged them. Out in the canyonlands, justice wasn't blind. It was decided by whoever had the loudest voice and the sharpest shovel. That's how it was for Clara Wynne, barely 22, and already branded by the cruelest word a woman could carry in those times: barren. Sunset painted the sky with streaks of rust and fire. The horizon looked like it had been set aflame, and in the middle of that blazing silence, Clara knelt, buried up to her neck. Her throat was dry, cracked. The grit of red sand stuck to her lips. Her eyes stung, but she didn't cry. There was no water left in her, not after what she'd endured. Aldrich Kane stood over her, preacher's collar undone, sweat streaking his temples. "You defied the Lord," he said. "You denied your purpose." His voice didn't tremble. He wasn't angry. He sounded more like a man nailing a cross than punishing his wife. Behind him stood two men, silent, hired, soulless. They didn't look at Clara, just at the preacher, waiting for the next order. Clara remembered when Aldrich had been kind, or at least soft-spoken, back when he came to her family's homestead, quoting psalms and offering stability. She'd been told that marrying a God-fearing man meant safety, respect, maybe even love. But love had turned to rules. Then rules turned to silence, and silence turned to this. With each scoop of earth packed around her, something inside her loosened. Not fear, that had gone hours ago, not shame. He'd already burned that out of her long before. What loosened was her name, her history, everything that tied her to this man, this canyon, this church. Her name had been hers once. Now it felt like a shackle. Aldrich pulled back, dusted off his hands, and nodded to the others. "Let her bones warn the others." They mounted up. Hooves stirred the dirt, and just like that, they were gone, like they'd never been there at all. Clara was alone. The desert night crept in with a chill that cut through her bones. Coyotes called from beyond the ridges. The wind hissed through the canyon like it carried old ghosts. Her heartbeat slowed, but her ears stayed sharp. Every gust, every shifting stone made her flinch. She whispered something, barely a breath, not a prayer. Clara no longer believed in salvation. She didn't expect rescue. All she had left was breath, and the stubborn refusal to let him be the last voice she ever heard. And just as the sky began to give way to stars, somewhere far off, a rider shifted course. A rancher who no longer prays. Callum Wright never expected much from the world anymore, not after what it had taken from him. The wind of the Utah frontier carried his story like so many others. Husband, father, then widower. He rode through his days like a man moving through smoke, eyes open but barely seeing. That evening he was headed home from the ridge. Just another day spent fixing a busted fence post, checking the cattle trail for bandits, and wondering if this life still had any meaning. His boys, 3 of them, waited at home, along with his baby girl, Ezra, who'd never know her mother. Maybelle had died 2 winters ago, bleeding out in their bed after a failed delivery. Church council said no doctors, said pain brought one closer to God. Callum had believed in heaven once, but heaven never answered. As his mare trotted through the soft dusk, he heard it, faint, barely noticeable beneath the whistle of the wind. He stopped, frowned. The horse's ears flicked toward the sound. He dismounted, listening. Again, there it was. A moan, a whisper. Most men would have dismissed it. The desert was full of tricks. The wind echoed between the rocks and made voices from nothing, but something told him to check. He didn't argue with it. He just followed the sound. As he crested the hill, his heart dropped. At first he thought he'd stumbled on a grave, freshly made, but then he saw the eyes, wide, glassy, alive, just barely. He dropped to his knees, brushing sand from her face. Her lips moved. No sound came out. He didn't ask questions, didn't shout for help. There was no one to hear. He looked around, saw no one. The sun had dipped and shadows were crawling fast. He pulled off his coat, wrapped it around her shoulders as best he could. Then he started digging, not with a shovel but with his hands. Fingernails cracked, dirt jammed under his skin. Still, he kept going. He didn't think about why she was here, who she was. He didn't care. All he saw was a woman buried alive by something cruel, and something inside him, something that had gone quiet since Mabel, came roaring back. By the time he pulled her free, she had passed out. He checked her pulse. It was there, faint and fluttering, like a wing trying to beat beneath too much weight. He lifted her onto the horse and rode through the dark. No prayers, just purpose. Maybe that was enough for now. The dig that changed two lives. Callum didn't stop riding, not once, not even to water the horse. Clara lay slumped in the saddle before him, her weight barely noticeable, like carrying a ghost made of smoke and silence. He spoke to her as they moved through the dark, low, firm words she couldn't hear, but maybe needed anyway. You hold on now, just a little longer. Ain't nobody gonna bury you again, not while I still got hands to dig. The desert gave way to the edge of his ranch around midnight. The homestead was quiet, its windows dark, save for a single flickering lantern in the main house. The barn creaked in the wind, and a dog barked once, then fell silent when it saw who was coming. He didn't take her inside. Something about the way she curled into herself made him choose the tool shed instead. It was dry, away from noise, and most importantly, far from the memories that clung to the bedroom where Mabel had once died. He laid her on an old cot, brushed sand from her hair, and gave her sips of water between split lips. She didn't wake fully, but her chest moved. That was enough for now. At dawn, Clara stirred. Her first sight was the rough-cut ceiling above her and the sound of wind pushing against wooden walls. Then pain, sharp, throbbing pain in every joint. Her throat was too raw to speak, but her eyes scanned the room in confusion. Where was she? Had she been saved, or simply moved from one punishment to another? Callum entered, moving slow, like a man approaching a spooked colt. I ain't here to hurt you, he said quietly. Found you out by Dead Rock. You're safe now. Just rest. She tried to sit up. He stopped her with a gentle hand. Whatever he did, whoever did it, you don't have to go back. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She listened, really listened, for the first time in days. The creak of wood, the soft groan of the wind outside, and the muffled cries of a baby. It was Ezra. She cried like something small trying to call the moon. Clara, still weak, pulled herself up, staggered to the door, and followed the sound. She didn't know why, maybe instinct, maybe habit, but something told her the baby needed more than milk. She needed music. Clara sat beside the crib and began to hum. Not a song she remembered, but a rhythm that felt like warmth. And slowly, the child calmed. Callum watched from the hallway, arms folded, heart doing something it hadn't done in months, ache. That hum, soft and sure, belonged in this house, and maybe, just maybe, so did the woman who gave it. He didn't say anything. He just left a blanket over her shoulders and walked back out into the night, unsure if what he was doing was right, only certain that it felt more right than anything had in a long, long time. Ghost in the tool shed. The next few days passed like slow thunder. Clara didn't speak much, but her presence grew louder with every kindness she offered. She mended Ezra's torn bonnet, picked lint from the boys' collars, and swept the shed floor with careful, grateful hands. But in her silence she carried shadows, memories that clung like smoke to the hem of her dress. The townsfolk didn't know she was there. Callum hadn't told a soul. He wasn't ready to explain, wasn't ready to admit that maybe, just maybe, The woman in his shed wasn't just a stranger anymore. On the fourth morning, Finn, the eldest of Callum's 3 boys, peeked through the shed window. He saw Clara brushing Ezra's hair with a comb she'd whittled from spare wood. The baby giggled. Finn blinked, then ran off. The others would know soon. That night, Clara stepped outside for the first time since her rescue. She stood barefoot on the porch, breathing in the sage-sweet air. The stars were out, clear and endless. Callum stood beside her, silent. "Why'd you stop praying?" she asked suddenly, voice barely a whisper. He didn't flinch. Didn't see the point. Didn't get no answers worth the waiting. She nodded slowly, as if she understood more than he expected. "I used to pray," she said, "before I married Aldrich, before he told me God only listened to men." That name, Aldrich, it dropped like a stone into still water. Callum tensed. Cain? She looked at him. That was his name. And just like that, everything shifted. Callum's blood turned to ice. Aldrich Cain, the same man who had preached fire and damnation at Mabel's burial, the same man who told him his wife died because her faith had wavered. Rage surged up, hot, wild, and uninvited. "You married that man?" Clara took a step back. "I didn't choose him," she said. "My father owed him land. I was the payment." Callum turned away, fists clenched. "You should have told me." "I didn't think I'd get to live long enough to explain." He didn't respond, just walked back inside, slamming the door behind him. But hours later, Clara found something on the shed stoop, a mug of warm tea, sweetened with honey. Next to it, a scrap of paper with one scribbled line. "Mabel told me not to carry anger into the grave." Clara picked up the tea, held it in both hands, and for the first time since her burial, she allowed herself to cry, not out of fear, but because someone had seen her and chosen not to turn away. Names, lies, and the past. The next morning came with no words between them, just the scraping of spoons on tin plates and the creak of floorboards beneath tired boots. Clara stayed mostly inside the tool shed, brushing out her hair in the quiet, watching from the window as Callum mended fencing with his boys. There was still tension in the air, thick as cattle dust after a storm, but something had shifted. Names carry weight on the frontier. A name could open doors, or get you killed. And Cain was one of those names. Clara knew it. She saw how Callum's jaw clenched when he heard it, saw how the muscles in his back tightened when the boys asked, "Who is she, Pa?" And he didn't have an answer. Later that week, when Clara ventured into town for the first time, wrapped in a bonnet and shawl to hide the bruises that hadn't yet faded, a sharp-eyed woman at the dry goods store paused mid-transaction. "Aren't you one of the Cain wives?" Clara froze. Callum's head turned. The woman crossed her arms. "That preacher's been through more women than a saloon in July. Didn't expect one to crawl out alive." Word spread faster than fire in dry brush. Before sundown, the whole of Willow Hollow whispered it. Callum Wright had taken in Cain's discarded wife. Some said she bewitched him. Others said she was cursed. But none dared say it to Callum's face. At home that night, the silence between them boiled over. "I should have sent you away," Callum said without looking up from the kettle. "I should have known better." Clara stood in the doorway, spine straight despite the weight of it all. "Then why didn't you?" He turned slowly. "Because Mabel begged me not to live angry. But I am. I'm still so damn angry. At God, at Aldrich, at the world." Clara stepped forward. "You think I'm not? You think I haven't screamed into the dark until my voice disappeared? That I don't want to burn down everything he touched?" They stared at each other, two wounded souls trying to figure out if they were meant to fight or finally rest. Then quietly she said, "But you didn't leave me buried." And that means something. Callum exhaled, like something heavy had cracked inside him. He nodded once. That night she stayed in the main house, not as a guest, not as a servant, but as someone trying to build a place that didn't belong to violence or shame. She tucked Ezra into bed and whispered stories until the child's breathing slowed. And in the next room, Callum lay awake, listening to her voice like it was the only truth that still made sense. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he wanted to find out with her in it. New voices on the wind. Spring came fast in the Canyonlands. One day the wind howled with frost, and the next wildflowers were pushing through cracks in the dust, like defiance made real. Change was coming to the Wright homestead, some of it good, some of it strange. Marshal Inez Morales arrived just after the first thunderstorm, soaked to the bone but unbothered. Half Mexican, half Paiute, she rode like someone born in the saddle and carried herself like the law didn't scare her one bit, which made sense considering she was the law. She tipped her hat to Callum. "I'm hunting Aldrich Kane. Word says he's got blood on his hands and fire where his soul should be." Clara froze at the name. Ezra whimpered in her arms. Callum stepped between them instinctively. "He's not here," Callum said, "but if he comes looking, he won't leave smiling." Morales raised an eyebrow. "Good. Just make sure your bullets remember that badge answers to justice, not revenge." As if that weren't enough change, another soul found her way to their door. 10-year-old Finn Wright had snuck into town with his savings, coins kept hidden in a rusted can beneath the barn floor, and he didn't come back with candy or a pocket knife. He came back with a girl. Cora was deaf, mute, maybe 8 or 9. Her father, if you could call him that, had tried to trade her for whiskey. Finn saw it, didn't blink. He stepped between the man and the auction block with a gaze too old for his years and said, "She's mine now." Callum was furious at first, furious at the risk, at the weight, at the broken world that made boys into saviors. But Clara saw something different. She crouched before Cora, took her small hands, and pressed them against the porch. Then she stomped her boot twice. The wood trembled. Cora's eyes widened. Clara smiled, tapped her chest, then the boards. "You can feel music," she mouthed. "You can feel us." From that day on, the porch became their shared sanctuary. Cora learned to hear through touch. Finn learned to speak with his hands. Ezra laughed more, and Callum watched, slowly realizing that this house, once filled only with pain, was learning to speak joy again. The wind carried new voices now, ones that didn't demand obedience, but offered belonging. And for the first time since Maybelle's death, Callum began to wonder. Maybe the family he'd lost was only the beginning of the one he was meant to have. Fire at the gate. It started with the sound of hooves, not the steady, work-worn beat of ranchers or town riders, but something sharper, meaner. 4 horses, dust-caked and hard-mouthed, pulled up at the Wright homestead mid-morning. Their riders didn't dismount. They circled once, slow as vultures. Clara knew that posture, knew that silence. Then she saw him, Aldrich Kane. His hair was longer, grayer, pulled back under a black hat that tried to pass for humility. His eyes still held that cold calm, the kind that cloaked violence in scripture. He smiled when he saw her, not wide, just enough to say, "I never stopped believing you were mine." Callum stepped forward, one hand on the shotgun leaning beside the doorframe. "You've got no business here." Aldrich dismounted. "I came for my wife." "She's not yours anymore." Aldrich's smile faded. "The Lord," Callum raised the barrel, "ain't welcome here either." That's when the first punch landed. It came from behind. One of Aldrich's hired guns cracked Callum in the ribs with the butt of a rifle. He hit the dirt hard. Another man grabbed Finn by the collar. Clara screamed, rushing forward only to be yanked back by her hair. Ezra wailed from the porch. Cora trembled beside her, clutching the wooden post like it might protect her. Aldrich advanced on Clara. "You were meant to be silent," he growled. "To serve, to suffer. That's what a wife is for." But Clara wasn't that woman anymore. Her hand shot back, grasping the nearest thing she could find, a glass oil lamp sitting beside the porch rail. In one fluid motion, she smashed it against the gunman's head. Oil sprayed. Flame followed. In seconds, the man's coat lit up like dry brush in July. He screamed, rolling in the dirt. The chaos was sudden, loud, enough to throw everyone off balance. And then, like justice riding in on thunder, came the crack of a rifle. Marshal Morales rode in from the East Ridge. Spencer leveled, badge catching sunlight like a warning flare. "Hands off the girl, now!" The gunman hesitated. Morales didn't. Her next shot hit the porch post, splintering it beside one man's head. "Drop your weapons or meet your judgment." Callum pulled himself to his feet, bleeding but steady. Clara stood beside him, hands clenched, chest heaving. Cora peeked from behind her skirts. Finn held a rock in one fist, daring someone to move. The preacher's face shifted. Not fear, not regret, just recognition. He had no power here anymore. Morales stepped forward, cuffs ready. "You want God's law. Let's see how it matches with the territories." Trial under the cottonwoods. No court in sight, no judge in robes, but out in the Utah frontier, the cottonwoods would do. Marshal Morales wasn't just talk. She called for a trial, on the very ground where Aldrich's men had spilled violence. A jury was gathered before sundown, not the type found in cities, but the kind that understood the weight of wrong. There was Widow Carlisle, the town midwife, who had seen too many women stitched up in silence. Then old Tocho, a Paiute scout who'd survived more than one preacher's civilizing mission. A few ranch hands, a blacksmith's wife. Even a saloon girl who once scrubbed blood from Clara's temple after a sermon went too far. They all sat under the sway of the cottonwood trees, their branches whispering like they'd seen it all before. Aldrich stood, cuffed, trying to appear composed. "These are not legal proceedings," he sneered. "This is a mob." "No," Morales replied. "This is justice made by the people you forgot were people." Clara spoke first. Her voice cracked, but she stood tall. She told them about the day she was buried, about the punishments, the cold meals, the verses used like knives. Her eyes never left Aldrich's as she said, "I was made into a grave before I ever died." He just tried to finish the job. Then one of Aldrich's own men, Ephraim, spoke up. Shaking, head lowered, he admitted he'd helped bury more than one wife. "They didn't always scream," he said, "but they always cried." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Morales turned to the jury. "I'll take him to Salt Lake if you want, but that's weeks of trail and politics, or—" She nodded at the circle of townsfolk. "We settle it here, like the land intends." They voted before nightfall, banished, disarmed. No sanctuary in 100 miles, no church to hide behind, no flock to fool. He'd leave with nothing but his boots and the stain of his name. He tried to speak, tried to shout, but Morales silenced him with one glance. And just like that, Aldrich Kane walked into exile, alone, stripped of every false thing he'd wrapped himself in. Clara watched him go, and for the first time, she felt taller than his shadow. Garden from a grave. It's funny how the earth remembers. A place that once held fear and fire can, with enough time and tenderness, grow something beautiful. Clara stood in the exact spot where Aldrich's men had tried to break her family. Her fingers were in the soil now, not to dig herself out, but to plant something in. The children watched, curious. Her voice, calm and even, explained each motion. "This is mustard seed," she said to Finn, placing one in his palm. "Looks small, doesn't it? But it grows into something that holds the sky." Beside her, little Cora knelt in the dirt, hands pressed to the ground, feeling the movement beneath them. Clara showed her how to water gently, how to pat the earth down just enough to give roots a home. Ezra giggled nearby, chewing on a bean pod she'd snuck from the basket. They planted beans, sage, even a single cottonwood sapling. Right where Aldrich had stood shouting verses, now grew a place for vines, shade, and hope. No one said it out loud, but every scoop of soil was a kind of healing. Callum stood off to the side, arms folded, watching them. He still didn't know what this feeling was. It wasn't romance, not yet. It wasn't just gratitude either. It was something quieter, stronger. The feeling of finding a person who didn't just survive the storm, but planted a home in the ashes of it. That night, Clara cooked for everyone. Not out of duty, but because she wanted to. Finn set the table without being asked. Cora folded napkins the way Clara showed her, mimicking her movements like a shadow turned to light. After supper, they all sat on the porch. Cora tapped her foot against the floorboards while Clara hummed. It was the same tune from the night of her rescue, the same lullaby Ezra had first stilled to. But now it was fuller, deeper. Cora pressed her hand to the wood. Her smile bloomed like spring rain. She couldn't hear the song, but she could feel it in her bones. Finn leaned in and whispered, "She says it feels like thunder that doesn't hurt." Callum nodded, blinking against something that stung in his eyes. The homestead, once filled with silence and ghosts, now echoed with small joys, bare feet across the porch, shared laughter, stories by firelight. They didn't talk about Aldrich anymore. They didn't need to. He was part of the dust now, part of the past. What mattered was what came next. And that little garden, sprouting right from the grave of violence, was living proof that something better could grow where pain once ruled. Sky wide enough for forgiveness. The first rain of summer came with no warning, just a wall of gray rolling in from the south, turning dust to mud and silence to song. Callum stood on the ridge, soaking wet, holding something small in his hand, Maybelle's locket. He opened it once more. Inside was a worn sketch of her, lines fading but still familiar. Her smile was soft, forgiving. He remembered her last words, whispered through the pain, "Don't let this be the end of your heart." For 2 years he'd let guilt choke him. He'd clung to grief like armor, convinced he wasn't allowed to feel joy again. But now, watching the clouds break open above the homestead, where Clara was reading stories to the children and Cora danced barefoot in the rain, he finally understood. Letting go wasn't betrayal, it was release. He crouched low, found a patch of fresh grass, and gently buried the locket. No cross, no stone, just soil, sky, and peace. When he returned to the house, Clara met him at the door. Her hair was damp, cheeks flushed, eyes steady. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. I think I'm ready." She didn't ask for what. She already knew. That evening they didn't speak of vows or futures. There was no ceremony, no preacher, no papers. But when Finn brought Clara a hand-drawn card that read "Ma," and Cora signed it with a smile, something unspoken was sealed. From then on, the town stopped whispering. They just accepted it. Clara was part of the Wright family, not a guest, not a burden, a mother, a teacher, a survivor. The cottonwood sapling grew faster than anyone expected. By fall, it stood taller than a man. The mustard flowers bloomed gold, and the garden fed more than bellies. It fed the spirit. And when travelers passed through, they sometimes asked about the woman who tended the soil with such care, about the girl who danced with her hands, about the rancher who never prayed out loud but built a home that felt like one. They'd hear bits and pieces, some true, some made larger by story, but what always lingered was this. She had been buried, he had been broken, but they found each other. And sometimes the hardest rescue isn't pulling someone from the earth. It's pulling yourself out of the past, learning how to grow something new and believing against all odds that love can still bloom in even the harshest soil. That's the real Wild West love story. Not a tale of bullets or bar fights, but of healing, quiet, steady, and strong enough to outlast the dust. And that is the kind of justice no preacher can bury.